increasing instability in Afghanistan. As attacks grow more frequent, Afghan soldiers are deserting the army at record rates. I'm Adi Janayanar, and today's newsmaker is Afghanistan's deadly dilemma. U.S. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson made a fleeting visit to a U.S. base in Afghanistan this week. There, he met President Ashraf Ghani to reaffirm America's commitment to helping Afghanistan, keeping itself safe and secure. But that's proving to be an incredibly challenging task. The country has been rocked by multiple attacks in recent months. And a new report says the number of U.S.-trained Afghan troops going AWOL has doubled in the past year. But why? It seems soldiers face a dilemma: desert or risk death. So, is it a failing of the U.S. training program, or does it reflect a lack of will among Afghan forces? And what does this all mean for the fight against the Taliban? Natalie Pohanen has more.
Rex Tillerson's first visit to Afghanistan this week was cloaked in secrecy. It lasted less than 3 hours, but it allowed the US Secretary of State to meet with Afghan President Ashraf Ghani. While footage shows they were at Bagram Air Base, Ghani's office released this photo, which edited out the alarm and military clock, making it less obvious where they met. But Tillerson's message about the US strategy in Afghanistan was explicit.
Well, the President's made it clear that we're here to stay until we can secure a process of reconciliation and peace. Clearly, we have to continue the fight against the Taliban and against others in order for them to understand they will never win a military victory.
These Afghan National Army commandos are training to take out the Taliban. And in this exercise in Kabul, they accomplish their mission. Training and retaining members of the Afghan National Defense and Security Forces is a core part of the strategy to stop a resurgent Taliban. But there are problems with getting them to the front lines. A new report found that in 2016, the percentage of Afghan trainees who went AWOL from US-based training doubled from the historical average of 6 to 7% to 13%. It says the AWOL rate is likely to either remain steady or increase. It found the most common reasons for deserting were personal and family safety concerns and a perceived job insecurity in Afghanistan following training, because they're not guaranteed employment when they return. The US and its coalition partners have spent billions of dollars on training and building up the Afghan security forces. The Afghans who do serve are in one of the most dangerous professions. Between January and May this year, 2,531 service members were killed in action and 4,238 were wounded. In the last 2 weeks, a bus carrying military cadets in Kabul was ambushed by the Taliban. 15 trainees died. With security personnel coming under increasing attack while others desert, improving morale for the long fight ahead could prove to be one of the most important tactics in bringing peace to Afghanistan. Natalie Pohanen, The Newsmakers.
Joining me now from Kabul is Javid Faisal. He's the deputy spokesman for the chief executive of Afghanistan. From Vermont, we have Peter Galbraith. He's a former UN deputy representative to Afghanistan. And in Washington, Omar Samad. He's a former Afghan ambassador to Canada, France, and Belgium. Gentlemen, thank you all for joining us here on The Newsmakers. Javid Faisal, let's begin with you. The latest numbers show that 13% of the trained Afghan personnel are going missing. How serious of a problem is this?
I don't believe the numbers we have are correct. What I heard earlier was about 10%, and that's also the number of those who are getting trained out of Afghanistan. If we bring all of that together, it doesn't make even 5% of the whole Afghan National Security and Defense Forces, which are crossing 350,000 as of yet. That's not the right thing. But at the same time, it is a problem, even if it's in the lowest level possible. It's a problem, and it's something that we are looking into to make sure that our forces are no longer facing such problems that they are facing today.
All right, Omar Samad, a little bit of inconsistency with the numbers, but still hundreds of not showing up on their post. How is this affecting the country's fight against the Taliban?
This has been a trend from the very beginning, where you have a certain level of attrition and people not showing up for work or leaving for whatever reason. It's obviously a bit more problematic when you are talking about Afghan officers at higher levels who are being trained overseas and who go AWOL. I think that in that case, we need to take this issue very seriously. We need to find ways to do better vetting, as well as make sure that there are some conditionalities put on anyone going overseas for any type of training or education purposes, to make sure that they do come back and serve. Now, there are probably certain extenuating circumstances under which some people probably will not or cannot go back. But having said this, it does have an impact on morale to some extent. I think that it's one factor, not a major one. But the whole strategy of the United States, Afghanistan, NATO, and those who are helping Afghanistan and have helped Afghanistan over the years is to rely on the Afghan National Defense and Security Forces. And that means that the fight against the enemy, as well as the protection of the Afghan population, rests on the shoulders of these forces. And these forces, on one hand, have done well. On the other hand, are still continuing to face some challenges and will continue to need assistance from the international community.
Peter Gabraith, what does the U.S. think of all this? Having spent billions of dollars in this campaign, it's America's longest war. Will it somehow reconsider, reevaluate this entire training program?
I think the problem is not with the training program. And the problem with the Afghan National Security Forces is probably the least of the problems. The problem is with the broader strategy, which is a counterinsurgency strategy. So the way it worked when there were a large number of troops there, the NATO forces would clear an area, and they could do that fairly effectively. Then the Afghan National Security Forces would come in to hold the area. And now the Afghan National Security Forces with Western advisors, NATO advisors, are doing both the clearing and the holding. But it's the next part of the process. The theory then is that you would bring in local police who would provide law and order. You bring in administration to provide honest governance. Then the economy would grow, and the population, the least committed insurgents would come over to your side. The middle committed insurgents would, sort of lay low, and then the population would turn in the extremists. But the problem has been in the latter part of the strategy. They've been unable to provide honest administration, unable to provide effective policing, and a lot of the local officials, people who are in or out of power, in fact, are also in contact with the Taliban. We think of it in the United States as if there were two sides. But in fact, it's not always that way. You have to think of the whole thing is a bit like the mafia in Sicily in the 1970s, where the police and the local authorities were also in league with the mafia, even as they seemed to be at war with it.
Javeed Faisal, your response to that? Because many of these Afghans are signing up to become military servicemen or as well as police, simply because there aren't enough jobs out there. So why aren't they taking their positions?
Let me start from trust and faith on the Afghan National Security Forces. Afghans, they have faith on their security forces. They believe that these forces are defending the people from the terror, from the evil. And at the same time, it's not only the Afghans who are trusting the Afghan National Security Forces. The world today, the US, the United States, is having faith on the Afghan forces. The reason they are supporting, the reason they are equipping the Afghan National Security Forces, especially the Afghan Air Force, the new Super Tucanos, the Black Hawks for the Afghan army. Those are signs of faith in the Afghan army, and it means that we are capable to defend this country. At the same time, people who are joining the army in this country, it's not because of the wages, it's not because of the $200 they are getting paid on a monthly basis. It's because of this faith in the future in their country, and this faith that they are the ones who have to be protecting their people. I'm not sure if I heard all the words he said, but I heard all the words from Ambassador Samad, but I didn't hear all what the other guests said. But I believe, and the Afghans believe, and the world believes that the Afghan National Security Forces can depend on their own. In the last 3 years, from 2014 as of yet, they proved that they are capable of defending their people, their country. What is needed is the support from the international community. What is needed is that these forces have to be well equipped to make sure that we achieve our common goal to eliminate terrorism from Afghanistan. And this common goal is between Afghanistan and the world, not only our goal to achieve.
Omar Samad, let me ask you, how's the morale within the Afghan National Security Forces?
Well, the morale, I think, goes up and down depending on what is happening on the ground. Lately, we, as your report also indicated, we have seen a spate of very bloody attacks, and it is targeting army, police, and other security forces in Afghanistan, trying to penetrate as deeply as possible. This points to a problem that, to some extent, justifies some of the issues that were brought up by Mr. Galbraith, that there is a dysfunction at some level. Now, I am not sure if the level is the lower level where the local administrator is not doing a proper job, but the local administrator has to be appointed by someone, and then that person has to be appointed by somebody else. So it goes up all the way to leadership, and it goes back all the way to good management, and making sure that you are able to have the right people doing the job that they're supposed to be doing, whether it's on the civilian side or on the military and police side. For that, I believe that we have had a lot of progress. We are showing progress across the board, especially with the special forces of Afghanistan. There's now a plan to double those numbers because they have been so effective in fighting terrorism. But special forces are not going to do all the work that is needed. Obviously, we need to go to the local level, and at the local level, we need to make sure that we offer better governance, better management, less corruption, and more functionality, and making sure that the average Afghan and the population is connected to the government and feels that the government, whether they are civilian or military, is there to protect them, is there to serve them, and that there's accountability.
If President Donald Trump has campaigned on America first, how does one tackle this?
Afghanistan is a very decentralized country, very diverse, one of the most diverse in the world, both ethnically and geographically. I mean, there are big mountains that divide up the country. And yet it has a highly centralized constitution. Centralized in the sense that all power is concentrated in Kabul, so that all those people he was describing being appointed are ultimately appointed by the president of Afghanistan, by one person. And within Kabul, much power is concentrated in the hand of the presidency rather than on parliament, which really would represent the ethnic diversity of Afghanistan. And so there has been a crisis of legitimacy. And there have been a series of elections that were characterized by very significant fraud. Now, in both Ashraf Ghani and Abdullah, and I know both men well, there's really a pair of very competent, committed leaders, and a very welcome change from Hamid Karzai, who certainly by the end had become quite erratic. But that said, this arrangement that they have of a president and a chief executive was a result of an election that was characterized by fraud and not accepted by a significant part of the Afghan population. So there needs to be some way that's going to give greater legitimacy to the government, and then also filtering down to be able to provide honest administration.
Javid Faisal, I want to get back to this topic of these ghost fighters. Just talk to us about some of the reasons why some of these are going missing. Is it payment? Is it family obligations? Why is this such an increasing problem?
As I said earlier, this problem is more in the number of people who are getting trained out of Afghanistan. And that number is not very big. Forces who are getting trained locally or in the Afghan training centers here in Afghanistan, we don't have much of that bigger attrition rate. But then that's in the same time, it's not a problem only with Afghans. It's all over the places. You see people all around the globe who are fleeing elsewhere in the West or in Europe. In the same time, many are returning back to this country. We have had people, refugees who went to Europe, but now they are voluntarily coming back to Afghanistan, and there is a big number of them who are joining the Afghan National Security Forces. So these are the good stories. But inside Afghanistan, we don't have much of those cases. The people who are getting trained here locally, they are willing to sacrifice for their country. They are joining the army because they know what they are going to be facing. They see the casualty numbers, they are seeing the incidents, and they are witnessing all of the situation in this country, but they still decide to join the army and protect their people. That's something that continues, and it's not much of a bigger concern.
Peter Galbraith, let's come back to these ghost fighters, the ones that were trained in the United States. Where are they? Where do they end up? Do they stay in the United States? Do they go back to Afghanistan? And what is the U.S. doing to actually find them?
Well, I think that the overwhelming number of them, of course, go back to Afghanistan. Now, these who are being trained in the United States are obviously not the ordinary soldiers. They're the officers. There may be some number that seek political asylum or claim it or simply disappear, and it's not hard to disappear in the United States as a legal immigrant. But this is, it's a problem in the sense that this is very expensive because these people have a huge investment's been made in them. But I don't think that the problem of desertion in the Afghan National Security Forces is the root of the problem of what's going on in Afghanistan. Again, the root of the problem is the durability of the Taliban. And first, it has to be said that even in a country which was well run with a loyal security forces, it's really very difficult, if not impossible, to protect everybody from terrorist attacks. So, I mean, how can you stop somebody from getting into a Shiite mosque and blowing themselves up? I mean, I don't think if we had that number of terrorists in the United States, one could be able to do it. Turkey has had experience with this kind of thing. So, the challenge of providing security in a country where there is there's still a significant insurgency, a significant number of terrorists, is not, it's extremely difficult and if not impossible to do. But I think the problems in Afghanistan are not primarily with the security forces, although there's some there. The larger problems are with the police, with corruption, with the connections, particularly in the Pashtun areas, between local administration and the Taliban, with a level of corruption that's made it difficult to improve the lives of ordinary Afghans. I'll give just one example. The U.S. government has spent billions building roads in Afghanistan to enable farmers to bring their product to market, and so that they will no longer be subsistence farmers. But they don't do it because the police then set up checkpoints, and they collect so much from the farmers that it's not worth it to them to try to bring their product to market, that they're better off remaining subsistence farmers.
Okay. Omar Samad, Peter talked about the durability of the insurgency. Is Afghanistan failing in its fight against the Taliban?
No, I don't think so. I think that at the end of the day, it's those Taliban and those who manage and operate the Taliban for proxy, regional, geostrategic, geopolitical reasons, inside and outside the country, who are failing. You know, the Taliban is a project that started almost 20 years ago. It hasn't really succeeded, but somehow, for some reason, those who are supporting it and promoting it feel and think that it is succeeding. In the long run, it's going to fail. So the crux of the problem with security is the fact that we are faced with terrorism. Security is threatened by mostly, on one hand, terrorist elements, on the other hand, criminal elements within the country, and those who are benefiting one way or the other way, whether it's from smuggling, the drug issue, arms running, and all of this. And there's a nexus between all of these forces that exists as well. So that makes it more complicated. And the nexus goes beyond Afghanistan's borders, where it's fed and also where most of the money is made. So if you look at it overall, I think that we need a strategy that really addresses all these components, but at the same time, the crux, the middle, the core has to do with dismantling these sanctuaries, these support networks that exist outside of Afghanistan, mainly in Pakistan. Now there are rumors, at least reports and claims that other countries, maybe the Russians and others, are also contributing for their own new reasons that have to do with Daesh and IS. So it's a complicated situation in Afghanistan, but to protect the Afghan people, we need to strengthen the Afghan forces. We need to make sure the Afghan government has more legitimacy and also more effectiveness and is better suited and does a better job of governing. And at the same time, we need to fight terrorism where it comes from, at its root. And the roots of terrorism that threatens Afghanistan are mainly outside the country.
Peter, I want to turn back to you. You said that Omar mentioned that the Taliban is a project that will not succeed, has not succeeded, but they control large parts of the country. Has the U.S. wasted its money here? Also going back to the example you gave about the roads.
Yes, the United States has wasted huge amounts of money in Afghanistan, in part because both in the Bush and early Obama administrations, the United States substituted what it thought Afghanistan should look like for what Afghans thought it should look like. Interventions tend to work where the United States, where the outside world, the United States and others, support local parties in their efforts. For example, it worked quite well at the beginning when the U.S. supported the Northern Alliance to oust the Taliban. And a lot of the aid that's been given has simply fueled the corruption and created the networks that make success extremely difficult, if not impossible. But on the other hand, the Taliban, they're not going to win. The trouble is they're also not going to go away. They'll never take Kabul again, but they can control large parts of the countryside. They control parts of Kandahar and some other cities during the night at different hours. And that is the problem, and I guess ultimately it's going to require a negotiated solution, but that's going to be very difficult to achieve as well.
Javeed Faisal, I'm going to give you your final thoughts.
Let me correct a few things. First, Taliban do not control any area in Kandahar, neither in the city nor in the districts. In the same time, let me also correct that we, or the U.S., have not wasted money in Afghanistan. We might have wasted opportunities. We must have given up on some of our opportunities, but we did not waste the money here. Today, if I can talk from Kabul, it's the result of the investment the U.S. had in Afghanistan in the past 15 years. You couldn't speak a single word before this investment in this country. Today, the TV you have here, today, the young generation you have here, the schools you have here, the army you have here, the Air Force, the education, everything in this country is because of the investment of the U.S. and the world in this country. It was a very useful investment, and if it continues, we will be doing much better. We will be a better country. Just one last word on the U.S. first, or the United States interests first. On this slogan, I would just like to say that if we are eliminating terrorism in Afghanistan, if the US is investing on the Afghan forces to be capable to face threats on their own and destroy terrorism in this country, it's the interest of the United States, it's the interest of the world, and it can bring peace and stability not only to Afghanistan, but to the region and to the world.
All right, Javid Faisal, Peter Galbraith, and Omar Samad, thank you very much for joining us here on the Newsmakers. Still to come here on the Newsmakers. Protests spread across Morocco. Is the kingdom trying to suppress dissent? And we speak with best-selling author Parag Khanna, and we ask why the world is seeing a wave of independence movements. What started with the death of a fishmonger 1 year ago led to Morocco's largest protests since the Arab Spring. Last year, the country's ethnically Berber Rif region saw thousands call for an end to government corruption and poverty. Since then, the nation has been plagued with unrest. A major crackdown has been enforced with more than 100 protesters being arrested, including Nasser Zevzafi. He's the leader of the popular movement Hirak al-Sha'abi, and he could face the death penalty. So rather than addressing grievances, is the kingdom quashing dissent? Vanessa Keneally has more.
Protests outside a courthouse in Casablanca. Inside were family members on trial for taking part in demonstrations last year. The activists are members of the Hirak Group, a movement set up by locals who were tired of the status quo. They are charged with conspiring against the state and protesting without authorization.
Our message is that we are taking part in a peaceful demonstration, not as some people accuse us of being anarchists or destructors or separatists.
The protests were sparked about a year ago in Rif, a region in northern Morocco. Police confiscated fish from Muhsin Fekri, saying he had caught them illegally, and they dumped his catch into a rubbish truck. Fikri jumped inside to get the fish back and was crushed by the compactor. Fikri has been compared to Tunisian vendor Mohamed Bouazizi, whose death in 2011 sparked the Arab Spring, which quickly spread across North Africa and the Middle East. The protests in both Tunisia and Morocco broke out over public anger about police brutality, corruption, and a lack of job opportunities.
We have a right to work here in our own country, but we have nothing to do.
Continuous demonstrations in Morocco over unemployment and cuts to education, as well as trade union strikes, threaten a royal family which has so far escaped the fate of other leaders in the region.
I hope that this government and its Prime Minister will take notice of this social discontent, because the future will only be unstable if the demands of the social crisis are not met.
The country's instability goes right to the top. In July, King Mohammed VI pardoned dozens of protesters who'd been jailed and blamed politicians for not doing more to create jobs and improve the economy. Then this week he went even further by sacking several ministers, including those in charge of education, health and housing. Meanwhile, those jailed in Casablanca are left waiting for the judges to decide their fate in the coming days. Vanessa Keneally, The Newsmakers.
To discuss this, I'm joined now from Rabat by Hassan Alawi. He's a Morocco-based journalist with decades of experience covering the region. Hassan, thank you very much for joining us. Let's start off with this. For many in the Rif region, all they wanted was for their grievances to be addressed. Yet members of the Hirak al-Sha'abi, they were rounded up, they were imprisoned, they were detained. Why is the kingdom choosing not to address this issue?
First of all, I'm not here to speak on behalf of the government because the government has its own spokesman. So I am here as an independent journalist. To give you an answer to your question, I think the government is trying very hard to give an answer to the grievances of the local population. And as you said already in your introduced in the reports, the king only 2 days sacked a handful of ministers and high officials because there was a huge development plan in this region, in Al Husayma region, and unfortunately it took a long time to implement it. And those who were found culprits, those who were found lacking, those who didn't do their job properly were sacked, and this is the first time it happened ever in Morocco. The king himself, which is the top authority in this country, is taking care of this problem, and there is no other proof than sacking 3 main ministers, including one of them is the leader of a party, and then he blacklisted some others who will never ever held office in the future. They will never have any mission in the future, because usually former officials, when they are not ministers anymore, for example, they are appointed as ambassadors or head of big offices. Okay. But 2 days ago, the king, after a report by the Court of Auditors, it was not a decision he took lightly. He set up an investigation committee back in June, and this investigation was carried out by the Interior Ministry and the Finance Ministry, and then the report was given to the Court of Auditors, and the auditors took at least, I think, 2 to 3 weeks to finalize this report. And when the king had the results last Monday or Tuesday, he took the decisions according to the Moroccan constitution.
Okay, let's try to understand the root of the problem here. For decades, the Rif region has been neglected. There's been little investment. Why is that?
Well, to be honest with you, Al Husayma is not the only region in Morocco that was neglected. I always say, apart from Casablanca, Rabat, Fez, Marrakesh, the big cities, if you go to the small cities and the small towns, you don't think you are in Morocco in the 21st century. The king's statements the other day didn't mention only Al Husayma. When he punished those responsible for what happened in Al Husayma, it was clearly said that Al Husayma was just one example. There are other parts of Morocco which have exactly the same fate, the same situation like Al Husayma. The only problem with Al Husayma is that it has been going on for a long time. It's a historical problem going back to the 20s. It's not only when Morocco gets its independence. This part of Morocco was under Spanish rule a long time ago, and the local inhabitants fought the Spanish protectors at the time, and things didn't improve for at least 60, 70 years. Things are improving now, but very slowly. And as I want to stress that Al Husayma is not a unique case. Lots of parts and the regions of Morocco have a long way to go to catch up with big cities like Casablanca and Rabat.
You say improving, albeit slowly, but our report true similarities to Mohamed Bouazizi's situation. Could we see an Arab uprising 2.0 here?
I spoke to a lot of people in Al Husayma there and then. They have a lot of grievances because they feel neglected, they feel that they deserve better. But drawing a similarity between Morocco and Tunisia in this particular case, I think sometimes is far-fetched by journalists and by some analysts. Morocco is a stable country, and the king is very popular. I think if we had a referendum or a plebiscite, he may get more than 90%. When you talk to the normal Moroccan, the average Moroccan everywhere, not only in Rabat, Casablanca, or Tangier, the royal family is well respected, the king is well respected, and drawing a similarity between Morocco and Tunisia and Bouazizi and Fikri. I think it's sometimes it's mainly the work of the media.
Okay. You say
more than anything else.
You say the king is extremely popular in the country. So my question to you is there a rift? Is there a divide between the monarchy and the government?
No, the government is doing its best, but the problem is with this particular program, this development program that normally was set up in 2015, it was not implemented properly by everyone, the ministers involved, the local governments, the local representative of the ministries there, and it was a lot of procrastination, a lot of delays, and it's unbelievable. I have a figure here. Out of 644 projects, after 1 year, only 5 were, let's say, finished or fully implemented, and 45 were going on, which is unbelievable. Out of 644, no more than 50 projects were either fully implemented or going on. That means the people who were trusted with these projects were not doing their job. And now we saw the result 48 hours ago, when some of them was sacked from the government, and the others who were in office at the time were put now in a blacklist. And I understand there are more heads to roll down, because today there was a cabinet meeting, and my understanding is on the agenda the fate of 14 other people were discussed at this meeting, and we may see probably today or tomorrow a new announcement that more people have been punished for what they didn't do there. Okay. And it's only at the beginning of probably, I would say, a purge, because a lot of people now are scared, not only in Al Husayma, but everywhere in Morocco. Okay. Because now the Moroccan king, the Moroccan palace, and the Moroccan government is not taking any risk with the people who are not doing their job properly.
And finally, very quickly, Hirak Al-Shabi has called for nationwide, countrywide protests for this weekend, for Saturday. It's a symbolic date, as you know, because it coincides with the first anniversary of Mohsin Fikri's death. How do you see events unfolding in Morocco?
Certainly in Al Husayma itself, there will be some kind of demonstration, probably a march with candles that night. In other cities, I think we may see some sympathizers with the Al-Hirak Shabi, but I don't believe, or I don't foresee huge demonstrations anywhere, because as I said, Morocco is a very stable country, and Moroccans have learned the lessons from the other countries like Tunisia, Libya, Iraq, Syria, and Yemen. And when you speak to the ordinary Moroccan citizen, they always praise God for the stability and the peace we have in this country. So I don't think that this anniversary will be marked with huge demonstrations or with an uprising or anything like that. Maybe Al Husayma will know some kind of demonstration to support Al-Hirak Al-Sha'bi. In other cities, there are always sympathizers that can express themselves by organizing marches or sit-ins or something like that, but I don't see, or I don't think we will see an uprising, and I don't see it happening at all.
Okay, Hassan Alawi joining us from Rabat in Morocco. Thank you for joining us here on the Newsmakers.
Spain is not a democracy. Spain acts like a dictatorship. All they're doing is imposing the law on us. They impose laws on us through judges and prosecutors. They impose laws on us through the police. There has been a police presence for weeks. They want to scare us with the police, with the justice system, with accusations of sedition and rebellion.
Catalans, Kurds, Biafrans, all have been pushing for independence with renewed fervor in recent weeks. And now, 2 regions in northern Italy have also voted overwhelmingly for greater autonomy. But what's behind this increasing drive for statehood? Best-selling author Parag Khanna argues that devolution, not democracy, is the biggest force driving global politics today. That's the desire for decentralizing power and responsibility to smaller units. It's quite a reversal from the trend of large nation states. In fact, the number of sovereign nations has almost quadrupled since the end of World War II. So is this just a natural progression? Can we expect to see more places wanting to break away? And what does money and globalization have to do with it all? Well, to help answer these questions, I'm joined now from Rome by Parag Khanna himself. He's the author of Connectography, Mapping the Future of Global Civilization. He was also named among the top 75 most influential people of the 21st century by Esquire magazine. Parag, so what's the impetus behind this awakening? For a very long time, we've seen civilizations, we've seen empires, a main driving factor to be more and more territory.
That's exactly right. It is a reversal. And actually, even though I argue that devolution is a more powerful force in the world today than democracy, let's remember that democracy is one of the drivers of devolution. Because once you have more democratic societies, they want more internal democracy, more local democracy. And it's those local units, the provinces, the cities, that are pushing now for greater autonomy, more devolution, and in some cases, yes, independence from the state itself. So ironically, if you support democracy, then you are also supporting local democracy and these devolutionary forces. But what's also very important to remember is that it's not just about independence. It's not about whether a province or a city separates completely and becomes a new sovereign country. What's also very interesting is the space in between full integration and total independence, which is this negotiation over what degree of autonomy. That's what's going on in Catalonia. That's what's happening in Veneto, in Italy. To some degree, because Kurdistan has not been able to break free, they are still within the Iraqi Federation. So in all of these cases, it's not all or nothing. It's about the negotiating space in between. And that is what devolution is all about. What degree of autonomy can this region or province or city have?
We're going to get into those specific examples in just a bit, but you say that democracy and devolution go hand in hand, that democracy is the foundation of our international laws right now. But it seems that your idea of devolution being a natural process doesn't go with international laws that are structured as they are today.
That's a very good point. There are two principles that are clashing with each other. One is the principle of self-determination of peoples, which we think of primarily as dating back to after World War I and after World War II with the decolonization process. The right of peoples to determine their own political future, to be free of colonial suppression, to no longer be part of the historical European empires of the 19th century and the 20th century. But it does clash with the sacrosanct principles of international law and sovereignty, by which there is supposed to be a consensus among recognition of state parties as to whether or not new countries are recognized. And that is a very conservative principle. It's a reactive principle. It's a principle that says that anything new that is created is causing the destruction of something else that was more valid, more legitimate, older, more stable. And so there is a bias in international law today against the liberal principle of self-determination. And it's these two 20th century principles that are really clashing with each other legally today. But on the ground, it plays out partially in that legal domain, but it is much more about the specific political circumstances of each case. And let's remember, most of all, each case is different because there's a different set of ideas about identity, how strong is that local identity, and most of all, we have to remember, each case is fundamentally also about money. It's about fiscal autonomy. It's about control over one's resources. It's the right to taxation, the right to determine how money is invested. That is one of the fundamental factors in every single case.
I'm going to get to globalization and money in just a bit, but you say that each example is unique. So is devolution a good thing for every country, for the entire world? Give me an example where it's worked for the benefit for all.
That's a really good question. Well, we've had many cases. If you want to take, again, a historical standpoint, let's remember, as you pointed out and as I wrote about in the book, the number of countries in the world has quadrupled since 1945, since the end of World War II. Don't we feel that that is a good thing, that people have been allowed to have their own nations, that India and Pakistan, African nations, have all become free from French and British colonial masters? So in that sense, this worldwide devolution pattern has been extremely significant and world historical and spread much more quickly and robustly than democracy has, which is backsliding in many ways, whereas devolution continues all over the world. So clearly it is a very positive trend in terms of people's ability for fulfillment. In recent years, we've seen East Timor, South Sudan, maybe Kurdistan, hopefully Palestine become independent countries. In all of those cases, we would say that is a sign of progress towards the self-determination of these peoples. So I do think that overall it is a very positive trend. And remember the number one positive thing about it. The more new countries you create, the more boundaries you settle, the less international conflict you have. We have to remember this, and everyone must remember, that devolution and demarcating new and stable boundaries between countries is the reason that we have so few international conflicts today. Devolution is the most important cause of international peace. I want everyone to remember that.
But you say that more money, more revenue is the driving force for all of this.
Yes, so depending on the situation, we have cases, if you look at Scotland, in the advance of their most recent referendum, oil prices were high, and so there was a very strong momentum towards independence, not only because of a very valid historical Scottish identity, but they also realized that they would get to control more of the North Sea oil revenues that Great Britain as a whole was bringing in. So there was a lot of momentum towards independence. In the case of Catalonia, Catalonia is one of the richest provinces of Spain. It brings in a tremendous amount of investment and tourism revenue, and they feel that they have to share too much of it with Madrid, especially bailing out Spain in the aftermath of the financial crisis, a series of payments which they felt would be never ending because of the economic malaise there. So money does play a very significant role in these deliberations about how much local control over those finances there is going to be, without a doubt.
So can you put, if you were to analyze each case individually, can you put Scotland, can you put Catalonia, can you put the Kurdish region of northern Iraq all in the same basket?
No, I don't think it's fair to put them all in the same basket. They are happening at a similar time, but let's remember that we have been having relentless devolution for 75 years. I'm glad that more people are paying attention to it now, but there is a bit of just a coincidence at play when it comes to Kurdistan, Catalonia, Scotland. They're not necessarily all that related to each other. If you look at these situations carefully, they have decades, if not centuries of history. In the case of the Kurds, quite frankly, millennia of history. I think we have to be honest about that. So each of these situations is very, very unique. But I do think that, again, I want to make a sort of normative message, a plea, that by pushing these issues down the road, we don't settle anything. We have to recognize that there is an inner desire, a yearning for people, for the alignment of people, of identity, of territory, of economics, to be something that is within the control of the people who are most affected by them. It is a deep human impulse. It will never go away. So every country that is facing these dynamics, whether it is Iraq, whether it is Spain, whether it is England, they should deal with it head on. There are very tangible solutions to each situation that look different. In the case of Catalonia, for example, they could have an agreement about revenue sharing in which Catalonia gives a little bit less tax money than it has been giving. And they could also have infrastructure corridors funded by the Spanish government that would incentivize the Catalans to want to be more part of the Spanish Federation. So in each situation, I do believe that there are very tangible, practical solutions that would de-escalate and de-emotionalize these cases. But we have to work very hard politically to accept those solutions, because I actually believe they are very clear, they are very much within our reach, and they are on the table. So we really have no excuse to continue to fight over these situations where the solutions are staring us in the face.
And finally, I have to play devil's advocate. We don't have much time left, but have you thought about your theory backfiring?
That's a very sort of generally, of course, there are cases, again, if you look at South Sudan, the independence of South Sudan has been very, very painful. If you think about their very difficult relations with the North, their very poor infrastructure, the civil war within their ruling parties, even within Kurdistan, what we've seen is that the response to their referendum has, of course, been isolation by their neighbors, and they haven't resolved their internal tensions between their ruling parties either. So it is never a rosy situation, right? It's always very, very difficult. And as I said at the very beginning, I do not advocate independence in all cases. Some countries are not going to be better off when they're independent. I am studying the broader devolution category, which encompasses everything from slight autonomy over education policy to complete revolution and secession and independence. All of that fits in the category of devolution. There are many options that are peaceful, that are win-win, and that are mutually beneficial, and that can avoid the kind of backfiring that you rightly point out does in fact take place. So I'm very cautious about supporting full independence universally. I think that countries have to be very, very prepared for a future where they're on their own. But let's remember one other extremely important trend of history is that the smaller and smaller our countries get through this process, the more they actually need to be global and connected to each other, because small countries can't survive on their own. Okay. They don't have enough food, fuel, water, resources, goods, production, and so forth. So we actually get towards a more connected, more globalized world if we have greater autonomy.
All right, Parag Khanna, the author of Connectography, Mapping the Future of Global Civilization. Indeed, a very fascinating subject. Thank you very much for joining us. That's all for this edition of the Newsmakers with me, Alican Ayandar. Check out more of our stories on YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. Remember to like, follow, and subscribe. Until next time, thanks for watching, and goodbye from Istanbul.